all started for me around 1968 when I woke up one day and looked out the window. I was 21 years old, and I said, wow, this world is an absolute mess. It's beautiful, but people hate one another, and there's such trouble when there could be such blessing. And not that I was thinking of God at that time at all, but now I could say, by the Spirit of the Lord, I was led to realize that the problem is inside man's heart. So, as I had been involved with advertising and looking to make a life for myself in the offices of New York City, in that very moment, everything changed. It was a revelation that took place. I don't even know how long it was. It was seconds, it was minutes, and I came out of it, and everything had shifted. All of my goals, all of my hopes, dreams, expectations were all different. And all I could think about was getting free of the self-centeredness, of the sickness that was in man, which I saw in myself. And only then could I make any contribution to life and really live at peace. A little while after that, I met my wife. We married in 1969, and she was very much of the same mind. And we set out from New York to find God. We spent a year in a hippie Renaissance community in Philadelphia, and then jumped into a Volkswagen bus and traveled around America. 15,000 miles, ending up on a commune in California. And we're very oriented toward renunciate thinking, like kind of renunciate yoga, we called it back then. It was pretty empty, and nothing was really answering the longing of my heart. And I was very, very aware of the emptiness, the hole that was inside. Well, August in 1972, I was at a tent, sleeping in a tent in a commune in California, and my cousin, who had come to an experience with Yeshua, who we called Jesus back then, came and told me that the Lord was alive and he wanted to live in me, and if I turned to him, I could know him and have a new life. Well, not knowing anything of such experience, I prayed a prayer and just said, Jesus, my heart is open to you. Come into my life and show me your way. And then it ended. Nothing happened. Within a month or so, I left the commune in California, and actually the strangeness of all of the things that we had done, the life we lived, brought our marriage to pretty much to an end. And I came back, went back to New York by myself, trying to find some meaning after having spent 4 years of searching. 3 o'clock in the morning in the winter of 1973, I was awakened by the Spirit of the Lord. I didn't think of him as the Lord then, but as I woke up, the presence of Jesus filled the room. And he, in the course of a very short time, revealed himself to me. I first understood that there was no limit to his power. And then I knew he knew everything I had ever done, every thought that I had ever had. His knowledge was also unlimited. And then I just experienced that he accepted me just as I was. And that empty place that was inside me was filled for the first time ever. And I began singing. I picked the guitar up and sang, Jesus, I love you, I love you. And in the middle of it, in the middle of this overflow of emotion, I thought, wait a minute, I'm Jewish. How could this be happening? This doesn't make any sense. What do my parents think? What do my friends think? Am I becoming a Jesus freak? Well, at that point, he said something. This is the love that I have for you to dwell in forever. but you need to give yourself to me to have it. And I understood very well, as a result of all that we had been through and let go of, what that meant. That were I to accept him, it was on the condition that whatever he said, I would do without question. And I wasn't prepared for that. And then he left. A little while later, a couple of months, I got a note from my wife in California, who we hadn't been together for 8 months, and told me she'd become a Christian. And oddly enough, I had forgotten about this experience. I had forgotten that I prayed the prayer back in August, and I had forgotten, it's hard to imagine, but I forgot it, that Yeshua had come to me in the morning, in 3 o'clock in the morning, and had this whole experience. So after hearing that my wife went to become a believer in Jesus, I thought, oh, this is another trip that she's on. Got on a plane, went to California with the idea of getting a divorce and starting my life all over again. Well, the long and the short of it is, when I saw her for the first time, she said some things to me that caused my eyes to be opened, that I remembered the prayer I prayed, the experience I had, and in the moment I knew that he was the Messiah, and I gave him my life completely. Within a month, we were back in New York together and starting our life as two strangers. Though we had gotten married 4 years before, we were people who didn't know each other, but we knew the Lord and were trusting him to rebuild our life and our marriage. So we were part of a congregation in New York City, and I was working at one point in a little studio making stained glass lamps. And one day, the Spirit of the Lord came without any warning. And I heard these words, you're going to receive some money. It'll be like an inheritance, but not exactly an inheritance. And it will be for you to go to Israel. And I'm going to bless you and show you how much I love you. Well, just to say, up until that time, we hadn't any thought of going to Israel. But when he said, I'm going to bless you and show you how much I love you, something happened. And I literally collapsed. All the strength went out of me. And I went from the studio to where we lived on another floor in this apartment building. I literally crawled. I couldn't even walk. I was completely overcome by the idea that he was going to show me how much he loved me. So I got up to my apartment and sat down at the dining table with my wife standing next to me. And I laughed and cried and laughed and cried for 2 hours. And I couldn't say one word. She was standing, and I couldn't say anything of what had happened. We wondered for a while what it meant, this word that I had heard, that we were going to receive money, it will be like an inheritance, but not exactly an inheritance. And were we moving to Israel? Were we just taking a trip? If we were just taking a trip, why did we need some prophetic expression? So we continued our life in the congregation. And in 1985, as we were on vacation one summer, I heard these words. I've called you to worship and evangelism, not to church administration. Worship is the response to my presence, and evangelism is the natural outgrowth of a life of worship. Well, there wasn't any question with how that landed. And my whole attention turned toward the subject of worship and began reading and studying. And I had gotten this verse in the time when I heard those words from the Lord in Mark 3:13 that said, He called those He wanted to be with Him that He might send them out to preach. And there was worship and evangelism, that they would be with Him and then He would send them out. Well, I continued studying. Our life was basically very, very normal. And then in 1989, we had an impression that it was time for us to go visit Israel. And around that same time, my father had a heart event. He had a quadruple bypass, which the operation went well, but within the framework of his aftercare, there were complications. And he ended up having severe brain damage and was kept on machines. He was kept alive. It ended up being for 9 weeks. Is that he passed away in February of 1989. And it was determined by the hospital administration that his death was the result of malpractice by the hospital. And my mother was awarded a sum of money. Well, when she got the money, the first thing she said was, some of this money will go to pay for your trip to Israel. And there was the prophecy from 12 years before. You'll receive some money. It will be like an inheritance, but not exactly an inheritance, and it will be for you to go to Israel. And that was the beginning of our calling to the land. Very unusual, and it really set us up for what would follow. Well, during our trip with our 2 children, the Lord called us and spoke to both of us that He wanted us within 3 years to immigrate, to make Aliyah. We went and told our pastors. At that time we were part of Times Square Church, and David Wilkerson was our pastor, and we shared this with he and one of the elders, and they bore witness to it and committed that they would help us. Because we were involved in the congregation there and had started a Jewish ministry to teach people of how to share with Jews and about the various holidays and Jewish culture and customs and such. Well, the following year, I went to Israel for a month by myself to seek God as to where He wanted us to live and what He wanted us to do when we made Aliyah. A friend picked me up at the airport and drove me up to the Galilee, where I was going to be staying for the night with some mutual friends. And as I was about to get out of the car, the Holy Spirit again came. And I heard these words: you will do what I've called you to do. It was a tone that left no question. It wasn't conditional. It was an absolute declaration that this would happen. Well, right along with that, I had this clear impression having to do with what this thing was that I was called to do. And what I knew of it, what I could sense of it was somewhat public and had some measure of significance to it. Well, that key kicked something off inside of me, because the state of my soul at that point, as a result of how I had grown up and different situations in my life, I had a tremendous need for acceptance and significance. And in the moment that I heard those words and had the sense of what this would be, by the Holy Spirit, I could see that if this thing were to happen at that time, it would have been impossible for me not to touch the glory of what God would do, and the result of that would be my loss of eternity. I'll tell you, you might have some kind of doctrinal, theological issue, but what happened to me when I sensed that was I exploded into uncontrollable, gut-wrenching weeping that lasted for 20 minutes. And I was every fiber of my being, every cell in my body, every ounce of energy that I had was crying out to God for mercy. That He would change me, that He would fix me, that He would do whatever needed to be done, that when this thing would happen, I would survive it. Like it was with my wife standing next to me, while I laughed and cried for 2 hours, this friend was sitting next to me in the car, just watching this. Well, the next morning, I was out walking in the hills of Galilee, and the Holy Spirit had taken me into the passage about the king that had the wedding banquet, and the guests didn't come. So He said to His servants, go out into the highways and byways and just gather people that my house would be full. And while I'm thinking about this, I hear these words. Don't you think I want the land filled with people praising me when I return? And the people here had better receive who I send. Now, I understood what He was saying. He was talking about the land of Israel being filled with people worshiping Him, and that there weren't enough believers. There weren't enough Messianic believers that could do that work, and He was going to bring the believers from the nations to fill the land with praise and worship in preparation for His coming. Well, when I heard that, it didn't land as though God was calling me to something. But it was kind of like I was just listening in on something He was saying. But I want to just summarize this testimony that I've just been through. In my life, I've had 3 encounters with God. I mean, not hearing words, not having impressions, but 3 experiences that took me outside of myself and outside of the ability to function normally. In the first one, Yeshua revealed Himself, that He had all power and authority, and was asking me to give my life to Him. In the second one, the Father spoke of my calling and the blessing that was going to come, and that was connected to Israel. The first was my calling to the Lord. The second was my calling to Israel. And the third was an encounter with the Holy Spirit, where His light came and showed me the inner workings of my heart and convicted me of my need for change. I saw God. I saw His plan for me, and then I saw myself. This is the background of my own personal story, and I hope that that will be meaningful to you as you listen to what comes next.